The Calling of Samuel. Hello and welcome. Find yourself in a comfortable position. Let your body settle into rest and allow your breathing to slow and deepen. Tonight, we journey together into the sacred pages of Scripture to a time of transition in Israel's story. A quiet moment when God spoke in the stillness of the night to a young boy named Samuel. This is a story about listening, about faithfulness in ordinary moments, about how God calls us sometimes when we least expect it, in the gentlest whisper of the darkness. Let the worries of your day fade away. There is nothing you need to do right now, nowhere you need to be, nothing to solve or fix. Simply rest and listen. Take a gentle breath in and slowly release. Let us begin. The time of the judges. Our story unfolds in a particular moment in Israel's history, a time that had grown weary and dim. For generations, the people had lived under judges, those Spirit-anointed leaders whom God raised up to deliver His people from oppression. It was a cycle, repeated again and again. The people would turn away from the Lord, falling into the worship of false gods. Then enemy nations would overrun them, and in their suffering, they would cry out to God. And the Lord, in His steadfast mercy, would raise up a judge to save them. There had been Deborah, who led with wisdom under the palm tree. Gideon, who was called from the winepress to lead 300 men with torches and trumpets. Samson, whose great strength flowed from his consecration to God. The book of Judges tells us that in those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. But now, as our story opens, the age of the judges was drawing to a close. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not widespread. It was as though heaven had grown quiet, waiting for something new to begin. Hannah's prayer. In the hill country of Ephraim, there lived a man named Elkanah. He had 2 wives, as was the custom of those times: Peninnah, who had children, and Hannah, who had none. Year after year, Elkanah would go up from his town to worship and sacrifice to the Lord Almighty at Shiloh, where the tabernacle stood and where Eli the priest served with his sons. Hannah's barrenness was a deep wound in her heart. In that culture, a woman without children carried not just personal sorrow, but also social shame. And Peninnah, her rival, provoked her bitterly until Hannah would weep and refuse to eat. One year after the family meal at Shiloh, Hannah rose and went to the tabernacle. Her heart was breaking, and in her anguish she prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly. And she made a vow. Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life. Her lips moved, but her voice made no sound. Only her heart poured out its plea. Old Eli the priest, sitting by the doorpost, watched her and thought she was drunk. But when she explained that she was a woman deeply troubled, pouring out her soul to the Lord, Eli blessed her. Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him. Hannah's face was no longer downcast. She had laid her burden before the Lord, and though nothing had changed yet in her circumstances, Everything had changed in her heart. She had entrusted her longing to God. In due time, the Lord remembered Hannah. She conceived and gave birth to a son, and she named him Samuel, which means heard by God, because as she said, I asked the Lord for him. A promise kept. When Samuel was weaned, perhaps 3 years old enough to be separated from his mother, Hannah kept her promise. She brought the child to Shiloh, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine for the sacrifice. Can you imagine the weight of that journey? Every step bringing her closer to the moment when she would place her precious son into the hands of another. She found Eli and said to him, "Pardon me, my lord, as surely as you live, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I asked of him. So now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life he will be given over to the Lord." And there, in the house of the Lord at Shiloh, young Samuel remained. His mother would visit him yearly, bringing a little robe she had made for him, watching him grow in the service of the Lord. Each year the robe a little larger, marking the passage of time, marking her love and her faithfulness. Samuel grew up in the presence of the Lord, ministering before Eli the priest. He wore a linen ephod, the simple garment of service. His childhood was not spent running through fields or playing with other children in his hometown, but in the quiet rhythms of the tabernacle, the morning sacrifices, the evening offerings, the tending of the lamps, the sacred routines of worship. The darkness of Eli's house. But all was not well in the house of God. Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests, but they were wicked men who had no regard for the Lord. They treated the Lord's offering with contempt, taking the best portions of the sacrifices for themselves by force, before the fat was burned on the altar as the law required. And worse still, they were sleeping with the women who served at the entrance to the tent of meeting. They carried themselves with an arrogance that infected every part of their ministry. What God had declared sacred, they treated as casual. What the people brought with trembling hands, they received with greedy fists. Instead of serving God's people, they preyed upon them. Instead of guiding Israel toward holiness, they used their priestly authority to indulge their appetites. And the people knew. Whispers traveled from household to household, from family to family. The priests of the Lord, meant to be examples of reverence and purity, had become symbols of corruption. Worshippers approached Shiloh with mixed hearts, devotion to God, but dread of the men who claimed to represent him. The sins of Hophni and Phinehas cast a long shadow over the sanctuary. Yet, even more grievous than their actions was the hardness of their hearts. They were not ignorant boys who stumbled into temptation. They were grown men who delighted in their sin. When confronted, they shrugged off correction. They felt untouchable, certain their priestly garments made them immune to judgment. Their role had become a costume, their service an act, their hearts far removed from the God they pretended to honor. Eli heard about all this. He was old now, his eyesight growing dim, and perhaps his will was dim as well. He rebuked his sons, saying, "Why do you do such things? I hear from all the people about these wicked deeds of yours. If one person sins against another, God may mediate for the offender, but if anyone sins against the Lord, who will intercede for them? But his sons did not listen to their father's rebuke, for it was the Lord's will to put them to death. Eli's correction came too late, too weak. He honored his sons more than he honored God. A man of God came to Eli with a pronouncement of judgment. Because Eli's sons had made themselves contemptible, and he had not restrained them, disaster would come upon his house. Both his sons would die on the same day, and the Lord would raise up for himself a faithful priest who would do according to what was in his heart and mind. In this darkness, in this corruption of the priesthood, in this silence from heaven, the boy Samuel was growing. The Lord was with him, and he grew in stature and in favor with the Lord and with people. Something was about to break through the silence. The night God called. One night, Samuel was lying down in the house of the Lord, where the ark of God was kept. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, those precious hours just before dawn, when darkness is deepest but morning is nearest. Eli was lying down in his usual place, his eyes so weak that he could barely see. Then the Lord called, "Samuel!" The boy sat up, his heart quickening. "Here I am," he said, and he ran to Eli. "Here I am, you called me." But Eli said, "I did not call. Go back and lie down." So Samuel went and lay down again. Perhaps he wondered if he had been dreaming, but then it came again. "Samuel!" Once more the boy arose and went to Eli. "Here I am, you called me." "My son," Eli said gently, "I did not call you. Go back and lie down." Samuel did not yet know the Lord. The word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. This was his first encounter with the voice of God, and he did not recognize it. How could he? In those days, the word of the Lord was rare. But when the Lord called a third time, and the boy went again to Eli, the old priest understood. His physical eyes might have been failing, but his spiritual perception awakened. He realized that the Lord was calling the boy. So Eli instructed Samuel, "Go and lie down, and if he calls you, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" As Samuel waited in the quiet, every sound of the night seemed sharper. The faint flicker of the lamp's flame, the soft rustle of the curtains, the distant settling of the wooden beams of the sanctuary. The stillness itself felt alive, as though heaven were holding its breath. For the first time in his life, Samuel sensed that the darkness around him was not empty. It was full of presence. Though he did not yet fully understand it, his spirit leaned forward, attentive. Somewhere deep within, a holy anticipation began to stir. And then, when the moment was right, when the boy's heart was open and expectant, the Lord revealed himself more clearly than before. Not merely a voice drifting through the night, but a presence that stood there, near the boy, near the ark, near the flickering lamp that symbolized God's enduring covenant. The Holy One of Israel stepped into the silence to speak to a child. In that instant, Samuel crossed a threshold he could never return from. The God who had been quiet for so long had broken the silence, and he had chosen Samuel as his vessel. The story of Israel was about to turn, not through a king or a warrior, but through a listening heart. Can you picture young Samuel walking back through the dimness to his sleeping place, his heart now alert, waiting? And when he lay down, the Lord came and stood there, calling as at the other times, "Samuel." And the boy answered just as Eli had taught him, "Speak, for your servant is listening." This is the posture of faith, not demanding, not bargaining, not even asking, but simply listening. Open, available, ready. The difficult message, what the Lord revealed to Samuel that night, was not easy. God told him that he was about to do something in Israel that would make the ears of everyone who heard about it tingle. The judgment pronounced against Eli's house would be carried out forever. Because of the sin Eli knew about, the sin he failed to restrain, his family's guilt would never be atoned for by sacrifice or offering. Samuel lay there until morning, and then he opened the doors of the house of the Lord, as was his custom. But he was afraid to tell Eli the vision. How could he tell this old man, who had been like a father to him, that God's judgment was coming upon his house? The weight of the message pressed on Samuel's young heart with a heaviness he had never known. He had heard the very voice of God, but what he carried now felt more like a burden than an honor. Every moment he hesitated, every time he passed by Eli's sleeping place or heard the old man stir, Samuel felt the tension grow. He feared not only wounding Eli's heart, but also misrepresenting the word of the Lord, a sacred trust he had barely begun to understand. Obedience, he was learning, sometimes meant speaking truths that broke one's own. And for Eli, this moment was inevitable. Deep down, he must have sensed that the silence of God had been broken for a reason, that the Lord had bypassed him and spoken to the boy. In the lines of his weary face and the slump of his shoulders lay a lifetime of compromise, of warnings given too softly, of sins witnessed but not stopped. When he called for Samuel that morning, there was almost a solemn resignation in his voice, as though he already knew the shape of the truth he was about to hear. Eli called to him, "Samuel, my son." "Here I am," Samuel replied. "What was it he said to you?" Eli asked. "Do not hide it from me. May God deal with you, be it ever so severely, if you hide from me anything he told you." And so Samuel told him everything, hiding nothing. And Eli, in a moment of humble submission that marked his character despite his failures, said simply, "He is the Lord. Let him do what is good in his eyes." Eli's acceptance of God's judgment is its own kind of faithfulness. He did not rage against it or deny it. He acknowledged the Lord's sovereignty, even over his own sorrow. Samuel the prophet. From that night forward, the Lord was with Samuel as he grew up. The Lord let none of Samuel's words fall to the ground. Everything Samuel spoke came to pass. And all Israel, from Dan in the far north to Beersheba in the south, recognized that Samuel was attested as a prophet of the Lord. The Lord continued to appear at Shiloh, revealing himself to Samuel through his word. The silence was broken. Heaven was speaking again, and Samuel's word came to all Israel. After the long darkness, after the corruption and the silence and the waiting, God had raised up his prophet, not through the expected channels, not through Eli's sons, not through the established priesthood, but through a child born of a barren woman's prayer, a child given back to God, a child who learned to say, "Speak, for your servant is listening." The battle and the ark. The time came when Israel went out to fight against the Philistines, their perpetual enemies. The Israelites camped at Ebenezer, and the Philistines at Aphek. The battle went badly for Israel. 4,000 men were killed on the battlefield. When the soldiers returned to camp, the elders asked, "Why did the Lord bring defeat on us today before the Philistines?" And someone suggested, "Let us bring the ark of the Lord's covenant from Shiloh, so that he may go with us and save us from the hand of our enemies." They thought the ark was like a magical talisman, a good luck charm that would guarantee victory. They had forgotten that what mattered was not the symbol, but the relationship. Not the physical presence of the ark, but the spiritual obedience to the one whose presence it represented. So they sent men to Shiloh, and they brought back the ark of the covenant of the Lord Almighty. And when the ark came into the camp, all Israel raised such a great shout that the ground shook. Eli's 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark. The Philistines heard the uproar and were afraid. "A god has come into the camp," they said. "We're doomed." But then they said to one another, "Be strong, Philistines, be men, or you will be subject to the Hebrews as they have been to you. Be men and fight." And the Philistines fought with desperation, and Israel was defeated. The slaughter was very great. 30,000 foot soldiers fell. The ark of God was captured, and Eli's 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, died, just as the word of the Lord had declared. The death of Eli. A man from the tribe of Benjamin ran from the battle line and reached Shiloh that same day, his clothes torn and dust on his head, the signs of mourning and disaster. When he arrived, there was Eli, sitting on his chair by the side of the road watching, for his heart feared for the ark of God. The messenger came into the town with his terrible news, and the whole town cried out. Eli heard the outcry and asked, "What is the meaning of this uproar?" The man hurried over to Eli and told him. He was 98 years old, and his eyes were set so that he could not see. "I have just come from the battle line," the man said. "I fled from it this very day." "What happened, my son?" Eli asked, and the messenger replied, "Israel fled before the Philistines, and the army has suffered heavy losses. Also your 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God has been captured." The deaths of his sons were sorrowful enough, yet even that grief could not overshadow the final tragedy. The ark, the very sign of God's covenant presence, was gone. In that moment, all the compromises of his life, all the warnings left heeded, gathered like a great storm around him. Israel had fallen, his house had fallen, and the glory itself had departed. When he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell backward off his chair by the side of the gate. His neck was broken and he died, for he was an old man and he was heavy. He had led Israel 40 years. The death of the judge, the end of an era, the ark in enemy hands, the priesthood corrupted and judged, the glory departed from Israel. It was the darkest moment in generations, and yet God's purposes were not thwarted. Even in judgment, even in disaster, the Lord was at work. Samuel remained the prophet, the answer to a barren woman's prayer, the boy who learned to listen in the darkness, now a man upon whom the word of the Lord rested. A new chapter was beginning. And so we come to the end of tonight's story, though not the end of Samuel's journey. From Hannah's desperate prayer to Samuel's faithful listening, from the darkness of Eli's house to the light of prophecy restored, we have walked through a time of transition, a time when God was doing something new. What does this ancient story speak to us tonight as we prepare for sleep? Perhaps it reminds us that God hears our prayers, even when we pray in silent anguish, even when we feel forgotten. Hannah's tears were not wasted. Samuel's name means heard by God, and you too are heard. Perhaps it teaches us that God often works in unexpected ways. He bypassed the established priesthood and spoke to a child. The great prophet of Israel emerged not from power or prestige, but from a mother's vow and a boy's availability. God's ways are not our ways. Perhaps it calls us to listen, truly listen, in the quiet moments. Samuel had to learn to recognize God's voice. He had to be taught to say, "Speak, for your servant is listening." In our noisy world, do we create space to hear the still, small voice? Do we cultivate the attentiveness of heart that says, "I am here, Lord, I am listening"? And perhaps, too, it reminds us that judgment and mercy are intertwined in God's character. Eli's house faced consequences for sin left unchecked, for a failure to honor God above family. And yet, even in that judgment, God was faithful to his larger purposes. Even when institutions fail, even when leaders disappoint, God remains sovereign, and his word does not fail. As you drift toward sleep now, let these truths settle over you like a blanket. God hears you. God sees you. God has purposes that are larger than any present darkness. And he still calls to his children in the night, inviting us to say, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." Rest now. Let your breathing slow. Let your body relax completely. There is nothing more to do tonight. You are safe. You are known. You are loved. May the God who spoke to Samuel in the darkness speak peace to your heart tonight. Sleep well. Amen.